I also want to welcome Megan Mackay to our meeting this morning, to the briefing. We'll have a more focused introduction for you later, Megan, but into this workshop. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Al, I'll hand over to you.
So this is a workshop where I had a briefing with Sharon, our new CE, and we were talking about some of the stuff that was coming up. And I mentioned about the emergency management bill that was being, had gone before Parliament and was out for submission. So she said, Al, you can do a workshop on this. I said, yay. But I think it was a really, really good idea. Often we get proposed legislation comes to us with very little time frame to consult our communities. And I think it's a really good opportunity for us to hear from you, our representatives of our communities, and then give feedback to a submission and give that to government and say, this is what local thinks. I think it's really, really important. And it gives effect to the purpose of the Local Government Act. And I'm a bit of a legal geek, though not qualified. And the purpose of the Local Government Act in Section 10 says, to enable democratic local decision-making and action by and on behalf of communities, and to promote the social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of communities in the present and for the future. And I hope that this workshop is giving effect to that. I have given out a whole lot of paperwork for you people to look at. Hopefully you have that in front of you. It was in Diligent. And the key thing is, and it's in the agenda, I don't know if you've got your agendas there, and this is what I intend to do, is go through that comparative table. And I have highlighted green, yellow, and red, and clear. So clear is something I don't think needs attention. It's maybe a technical change or no change. Green, I think we should support that. I think it's a good change. Yellow, maybe we need to look at that and put something in the submission. And red, I think you really need to think about that and what the consequences are for us. So if you haven't got that up in front of you, I want, excellent. So the overview of the proposed changes that and it's come out of the TAG review, which was the Technical Advisory Group review after a number of different events where government said, actually, we didn't quite get that right. They talked about the Port Hills fires, Kaikoura earthquake, Hurunui Kaikoura earthquake, sorry, Hurunui, and a number of other things that at a national level, they didn't seem to get the trust and confidence of the government and the people. And so they came up with a whole lot of points in the TAG review, and this has come out of that. The structure, the legislative structure of emergency management is the Act, the plan, and that's why you'll see the plan in this emergency management bill, the National Disaster Resilience Strategy, and then out of those comes our Canterbury Group Plan. So the structure of emergency management is slightly different to a whole lot of other things. It is communities, local, us, local councils, emergency management in councils, regional, so Canterbury Group, which are 9 councils that are together coordinating emergency management, both in peacetime and wartime, and then the National Emergency Management Agency, which used to be the ministry. So that's how it works here. We are big on local, as you know. We have probably one of the best models in New Zealand with our community response teams, over 210 people embedded into our community response for emergency management. The bill talks about making communities better prepared and able to respond or recover to emergencies. One of the key things is iwi and Māori participation and recognised and enabled and valued. So there's some key things in there. We are already doing some of that at a Canterbury group level. So Ngāi Tahu have a seat at the Joint Committee and they have a seat at KEG, and they have voting rights from what I understand, Sam. And the bill gives effect to that. It recognises that for the rest of New Zealand, because that doesn't happen everywhere. They talk about the impacts of emergencies on people and economy and the environment are reduced. So if we are better prepared, if critical infrastructure plan better, then we will get through and recover better from emergencies. And the emergency management system is well coordinated, high performing, and enjoys widespread trust and confidence, which is pretty key, I think. So the legislation, when you look at it, this bill should be enabling. That's the whole idea of the legislation. It enables us to get the job done. But with the enabling piece comes responsibility. And you'll see in section 37 that they have made it abundantly clear what the responsibilities of a local government are. There are no funding mechanisms in this proposed bill. And you'll see in my recommendation, and I'll put this out there first, that the council make a statement in regards to the needs for a first principles review of the Act, which includes a fair and reasonable funding system to achieve equity and outcomes across New Zealand. And I've said it could be framed like this: with the increase in both frequency and intensity of adverse events predicted due to climate change, which we are already experiencing, a first principles review of the legislation, which includes a better, more equitable funding model, is imperative. And I don't know what you think about that. This isn't a talk fest by me. This is a conversation, and it's actually a workshop. So on that point that I just raised about a first principles review, does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think that without funding, it's going to be toothless in the end. So I think that we need some way of funding it, as we're talking about before, with even with ECAN and council, there has to be look at funding. So I think this is a bigger part of that.
Thanks, Bob. Anyone else? Al, it feels to me like funding is obviously really key to this, but with funding often comes the strings that pull who can and can't do what with that money. And at the moment, we are doing more than many other TAs are doing. And so might be some of the last to receive the benefit of any change in funding, because there'll be a lot of spaces that will be being brought up to the Selwyn standard. And it's good for our country, so we need to think about how that is actually helpful for our nation. But if we're thinking about decisions for Selwyn, how would you feel about your ability to do the best that you can for Selwyn when actually, and that funding at the moment, you just come to us and ask us, and we've generally supported the new work that needs to be done, as opposed to putting in an application hoping that either the region or Wellington supports the extra funding and having no real connection to the decision makers if you remove it out from where we are now. Can you just talk a little bit about that dynamic and how you'd see that change?
So to put something else on the table, at the moment, I don't know whether you're aware, but Canterbury Group Joint Committee authorised a quick review of the Canterbury Emergency Management Group, the 9 councils, and how that is formed, funded, operates. That comes out Friday, I think, to the Joint Committee. And next week there is a Joint Committee, so mayors, CEs and others meeting here, where KPMG, who are the people who have done the review, will present that and do a briefing. So So that will look at models. Regional model, everybody in the centre, clusters, a whole lot of other different models that might work. The model at the moment, because of the way that Selwyn is funded and over the years has funded emergency management and has front-footed it, makes a big, big difference to what we can achieve and how we can reduce risk, increase resilience, be more ready, respond better, and then recover better. So the funding model works for us, but wider Canterbury, the funding model doesn't work because either they don't see the value in it or they can't afford it because there are other competing priorities and it slips down the ladder. With the increase in adverse events, and we know that's just getting worse and worse, NIWA have indicated that it could be a 1 in 80 year dry year this coming season with the shoulder sides, so spring and autumn being dry and fire risk, etc. It brings a whole lot of complications to how we do stuff. The funding model works for us, but is it equitable? And when we're looking at the bill, what is good for New Zealand, I suppose, like you said, Sam, is we have to look at that. So there's a balance there. Is that?
Excuse my naivety, but in terms of your emergency management committees, who ultimately oversees the function of that to make sure that that's working efficiently? And with that, you know, we're talking on 37 where it comes with the obligations and you're talking about the responsibilities. So you talk here about the communicating with the communities within the region or the districts about the hazards and risks. Ultimately, who's again responsible for having that communication with communities, and how is that done presently, and how are we looking at doing that going forward?
So the structure of emergency management across New Zealand is that you have regional groups. Everybody has to be in a group. Some are unitary authorities like Auckland. We are a group of 9 councils, one of the largest in New Zealand. There is a uniform charge, and I've forgotten what the actual name of the charge is, something uniform charge that he can collect from all ratepayers within the region and for emergency management, and it's tagged, I think, between 1% and 2%. That goes to the Canterbury Group and it runs the Canterbury Group office, which is in the Justice Precinct. That budget is overseen by the KEG, which is the Chief Executives Group, of which Sharon is a member, and the Joint Committee is the governance of that, of which Sam is a member. We, as a council, have a emergency management budget, which you generously give us, which is good. We are well resourced. So I have 2 bosses, Canterbury Group, and I have the CE, and we balance those 2 competing responsibilities. Canterbury Group spends money on public education, region planning, those sorts of things, and we align ourselves with the Canterbury Group plan. And in this is part of my direction. So my LTP activity plan come out of this, but it also comes out of what we need to do to achieve things within our communities. It's sort of complicated, but I think it's well balanced at the moment. My main boss is Sharon, CE. But in an emergency, and I'm head of emergency management, daytime, and an emergency controller. It makes a difference. And then recovery manager is one of my other hats. So quite different. And I have the authority and the responsibility under the Act to do things there. Always will work with the CE and the Mayor, but that's slightly different. Is that more confusing?
Oh no, that's really good. I guess getting down to the grassroots level, what does it look like moving forward now that you've got these documents in front of you for getting that information out to the community? How is that looking in a practical way?
So I think we do that reasonably well. It is hard to engage with communities. It's hard to hear from communities, but I think the way that we do it here is good. We've got that Be Prepared booklet that has gone out to every household. We will continue to update that and give that to households regularly. It might be every 2 to 3 years we need to update that. I think that is a really, really good start. We use Facebook. Not everybody's on Facebook. We don't have a LinkedIn profile. We don't use, what's the other thing that Elon Musk has just changed to X? Twitter. We don't have that. TikTok. No, we don't need TikTok. But we do have Selwyn Gets Ready, and we have over 10,000 people who are linked into that, or 10,000 households linked into that, where they are invested into emergency management via that. We send out alerts through that. Don't have to use EMAs. We can go right down to streets. Don't think we can get the households there. We can get right down to households. So it's very, very good. We promote that. The community response team model is, I think, the best in New Zealand, where we have 34 community response teams within Selwyn covering the whole geographical area of Selwyn. That is over 210 people that are involved in that are inducted into that are police checked, that have the ability to go to psychological first aid training, which is paid for by us, by you, and first aid training, which builds resilience within our communities. So that's a lot of what we do. Plus we do public education nights where we will talk about, we used to do just Alpine Fault 8, AF8 presentations, but after particularly Jason talking about, hey, look, do we just concentrate on AF8, or do we start to look at a broader Be Prepared message? And so that's where we've gone. If you're prepared for Alpine Fault, you're prepared for flooding, probably. Prepared for flooding, you're probably prepared for a wildfire. And then we have plans, specific plans for Alpine Fault, for wildfire. McHugh's Forest is a specific plan for Darfield, for evacuating Darfield. Tsunami plans. They're under review. And I think they're pretty good. I think we're well catered for the plans.
Thanks, Al. And I think there's the last group meeting had John Price come and talk about the risks, the increased risk, I suppose, to the country, or understanding what the risk was for the country. And as you've said, like a lot of the focus here has been on the Alpine Fault, which is a big risk for us. But like nationally, in this legislation, speaking to the national situation, there's all sorts of risks. And I mean, it might be quite helpful for a future conversation to have that perspective brought in for us as well. I was very surprised at the projections of casualties around, it was the Hikurangi going, and it was, you know, not in the hundreds of people that will die. It was in the tens of thousands of people that are at risk at different layers of response and timing and the ability to move people quickly. So while we can be quite focused on the Alpine Fault because it's right here, or on the fires because we've experienced them recently, nationally there's a whole lot of risks. And I think John said we are the second riskiest nation in the world. And so actually, which was a bit of a surprise to hear, but again, that just puts in the context of needing this legislation to be right for us and to enable the right level of national support and local enablement. And so that balance is going to be key. Sorry, there's a few other people that want to get in. Deborah, Phil, Shane.
Thank you. And thanks for explaining Selwyn's community response team process, because not every other council works like that. They actually depend on localised neighbourhood support to actually fill that void. And thanks to the work of Sue Jenkins and setting all of that up, to be honest, it's a much more efficient way of actually delivering the community response at a localised level, because in an emergency, we know that it'll be neighbours contacting neighbours before the emergency management team actually get there. So it's important that you know your neighbours. And there's probably not enough emphasis, for my thinking, with regards to the role that neighbourhood support actually does play throughout the district in that particular area. It's more associated with just the police, but it's not. It's working alongside FENS and civil defence and getting that localised cohesion. So is there an opportunity, because I know both models, right? Is there an opportunity in this bill to actually explain the Selwyn community response team process that's been structured and how it's actually managed under a rates collection instead of by volunteers for neighbourhood support having to go cap in hand to actually get funding to fund their particular model to be able to contribute. I just didn't see it in the document at all. And I just wondered where it sat with committees. There's also Red Cross, but out there as well, that will always step in. But I think neighbourhood support groups are more known than Red Cross with regards to their ability to come in. So I just wonder if there was that opportunity.
So there is no funding in this. There's only responsibilities. Section 37, so which is really, really clear, because it says the functions and duties. So puts quite a high responsibility on local authority, members of emergency management committees. In relation to hazards and risks, identify and assess those risks. So we do that via the district plan quite a lot, but we also look at what our highest risks are and look at readiness and response and risk reduction for that. But this stuff is actually broader than emergency management. It's actually a whole of council responsibility. You know, if you are lifting floor heights, that's in our plan. Building are doing that. The planning and strategy team are looking at that, which is why I got Clara, our French student, to look at that whole of council resilience stuff. What are we doing? The community development team, they are raising resilience in our community, and they are helping us to build that before an emergency, which makes a huge difference. Our infrastructure team, better pipes, better roads, those sorts of things build resilience within our communities. So they've looked at the risks and they're increasing resilience. So it says you have to report those and identify the assessment of those hazards to the committee. We have to manage those hazards and risks, which is what whole of council we do. That's not just my job, that whole of council. So we have to look at this, not with a microscope, but standing back and looking at it as a council collaboratively right across, what are we doing to do this stuff? And then it's identify how to reduce those risks. It's a big responsibility. And then implementing cost-effective risk reduction. It's quite a big cost in there. What are we doing? What are we putting in our district plan, our annual plan, our long-term plan to reduce risk cost effectively? And then consult, and this is a biggie, and it's hard, but this is an onus on us. Consult and communicate with communities within our region or district about those hazards and risks. And then there's a whole lot of other things that we have to do. Suitably trained and competent personnel, good luck with that, including volunteers and appropriate organisational structure. So the ELT have mandated that everybody in the council has to do some training in emergency management. So we're doing that. We're doing a lot of this stuff. This council has front-footed a whole lot of stuff, but this is our responsibility. And if we don't like this stuff, we should put a submission and go, hang on a minute. Can we follow through on this? Who pays? But there's a whole lot of stuff, and that section 37, I think, is one of the key things that if you read it and you have some comments on that, that's what we need to hear, and we'll let government know what, as a council, what we think.
Thank you. Phil?
Look, I was basically going to pick up on what Terry was just saying. It's around that community reassurance and support. But first of all, I'm going to talk about the document as a whole. The yellows and the reds that you've raised there seem just about the usual changes, and I think you've hit the nail. All the greens, if you're saying that you're supporting them all, I think you're absolutely right on the money. My question is, and you partially answered it, taking the money side out of it, does the new bill act compel councils to be prepared in that community reassurance and support space? And is it going to enable Selwyn District Council to work easier in that space?
Good question.
It'll be good. Yeah, it does.
I think it does overall. There's another wee fishhook in this, and it's a red for me, is that they are asking that the director has the ability to make regulations that will force us to do some things. So it might be setting standards. So it might say that you have to have per capita one controller, and they must have to do a 2-month course so that they are properly trained and competent to manage a crisis. It might put those sorts of things. It might say that per capita, you have to have X amount of trained staff for your EOC. That is the type of regulating, making power that they are asking to put in here. That's some fish hooks that could cost. So if you want to send one of our controllers on a 2-week course, that costs. The 1-week course, plus a bit of online stuff, costs about $6,000 plus travel and accommodation. So all our controllers by the end of the year will have done that. Because we believe that we need suitably qualified and competent people to lead our communities in a crisis.
You're not just in the crisis, I'm talking about the post-crisis, the reassurance and the support. It obviously goes on for weeks, months, years.
Also talk about competencies for recovery managers. So if I'm managing the recovery as the mandated recovery manager, am I competent to do that? Am I trained well enough to do that? And do I have the trust and confidence of not just you, but the community? So that's part of it. And that is in section 37. So it talks about trained and competent, suitably qualified people. I think we've picked our controllers. I think we've picked our staff really well. We train our volunteers. We train our communities.
Thank you. And in lieu of the mayor who's just nipped out for a second, he's Shane, you're next off the rank. Before we move to there, though, Phil, is it fair to be saying the point that you're asking in terms of the financial cost associated and making sure that we give that feedback into this, because the responsibility for after the event really does sit strongly with councils, and you'll see around the country that some councils are actually establishing recovery funds. And the current government, I think, has made that really clear while they've come to the party around lots of the challenges that's been around New Zealand. don't quote me on this directly, but I think they have indicated that they are looking for councils to start and take a little bit more responsibility. So is that the kind of thing that you're looking for being
Actually, just-
reflected into that?
That's what I'm saying. Are we compelled to be in that space and yet, and if we are, then that's something we should be feeding back. So anyway, we can sort of make it a national funded issue.
Yes.
The main part is about
Yeah.
whether we're enabled. So that's good reassurance.
So Al, I would take it that that would be really good to put some feedback in there, that there's a sense from Selwyn that there needs to be that national funding programme rather than it being the sole responsibility of councils. If I heard that correctly. Yeah, sweet. So back to you, Shane.
Kia ora Sharon, te tumu whakahaere, ngā mihi mana, tēnā rā tātou katoa. E la mihi ana kia koutou e Megan, na mahara mai, te nākoe, e te nai te rui hiki hiki te taumatu. Thank you very much, El. There's so many strands that are feeding into this workshop though, and you know, to be sent out, we got sent the workshop yesterday, and I'd been looking before that at the draft emergency management bill for Māori inclusion. But in reference to your section 37 there, and I think Phil's touched on it, it's hard to make, well, it's not hard because as you've said, Selwyn is certainly the leaders in the emergency management space, and it's not a matter of if and it's when, and that's why you know, the district is committed to supporting a sustainable model to support emergency services, and as part of the little local community response team, it's been great to be a part of that as a citizen and support our locals in some way or form. So this section 37 here, I guess by agreeing or accepting the recommendations to move forward, what is actually the cost to the council moving forward, and what does that look like per person by agreeing to it or putting it into the green? What are we agreeing to in terms of the costs? So my corridor was sort of around the inclusion of or the accepting of the draft of the Māori NEMA. Are we having that discussion as well? Is that part of this workshop or?
So that's part of the recommendations, is having Māori, iwi involvement at the national level, at the regional level, and at the local level. But mainly it talks about at the KEG Joint Committee and at NEMA as an advisory group in NEMA, and that's paid for, and voting rights. And then also recognising the role of Māori in response and paying for what would normally come in the welfare space, recognising that they can claim in their own right costs associated with welfare. Because marae have been used as welfare centres right around the country, and often it's been very, very hard to get some of the costs paid back. The Act doesn't do that. We've done it here, Kaikoura. We did a koha to the marae in Kaikoura, who were absolutely outstanding. Why should we have to go around back door and do that? If marae are being used as welfare centres, they should be able to claim reasonable costs like everybody else. So it's actually places that codifies that in the Act, which is really good. But does that speak to what you're saying?
Yeah, it does. The draft here doesn't really state difference between iwi and Māori. And at a local level, you've spoken to at a sort of regional level, and I can't speak for Ngāi Te Rui Hiki Hiki or Mana Whenua, but I'm interested in how, as a council, we are supporting or giving effect to local involvement. So I would like definition around what iwi, reimburse iwi and Māori is, what that looks like in practice, how are we supporting or giving effect to Te Tiriti or Te Kreme, and how to, by this workshop today, are we is this the last corridor we will have on that? Because I see I'm trying to scribble through the legislation in our diligent here, because it does say somewhere in here that costs. NEMA recognise that if iwi and Māori members are to be included in the JCs, they will need to pay one share each of administrative or related service costs. However, NEMA proposes to centrally fund the membership fees and expenses of iwi Māori and members on JCs for NEMA's existing baseline. So we're talking about sustainable levels of funding and then requirements of government to support the inclusion of Māori within the Act. So, you know, what are we seeking today to support you and Al in terms of this inclusion? And I'm aware that there'll be more kōrero around this and appropriateness of it. But really, you know, there's huge training involved. There's so much in this document here that unless there are other members that want to have a kōrero about it, I'd like to maybe flesh out a bit more.
So to start with Ngāi Tahu, I think looking across New Zealand, the leaders in what they are doing in emergency management is, and a whole lot of other things, but in emergency management, they have dedicated people, to at least 3 people who are full-time in that area. They, and we have helped with this by putting Ali Archer as one of the key people who is installing Starlink in every marae in the South Island, Ngāi Tahu marae in the South Island 18. Building resilience in comms and digital equity across the South Island, I think is absolutely outstanding. So Ngāi Tahu has actually got it right. And I was at a launch of Don't Be Scared, Be Prepared, which Ngāi Tahu launched about being prepared for emergencies, and it's absolutely outstanding and should go out for New Zealand. So it's supporting that. At a local level, we absolutely support Ngāi Tahu. We have more to do with supporting Rurunganga and a relationship with them, but that is funded locally, so not nationally. Just read this out. It's on the emergency management bill, and it's what I put at the beginning, and it is in your agenda. I just tried to preface that it's under emergency management bill explanatory notes, key points that I put there. Or it says Māori play a significant role in emergency management, responding swiftly to emergencies, providing valuable insights to inform risk reduction, readiness, response, recovery activities. However, their roles are not formally recognised under the 2002 Act. This bill recognises and enhances Māori participation in an emergency management system at a national, regional and local level and across governance, planning and operational activity, including by introducing a requirement to include Māori members on emergency management committees. So they're changing the name of group joint committee to committees. I've made a note in here that why are we just changing that name? Is it just politically expedient? Sometimes you just change things because you want to, or someone in Wellington who's a drafter has come up with a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea, but I'd like to know what you say about that. Establishing National Māori Emergency Management Advisory Group. So there already is a group, but this is now funded and it's will be in legislation to advise the Director of Emergency Management on Māori issues and knowledge as they relate to the purpose, functions of emergency management, and are requiring emergency management committees to engage with Māori on the development of emergency management committee plans. So these plans, which we have done, and I think this is a pretty good plan Canterbury Group has done. Does that speak to?
It does, Alan. Thank you very much. I guess then it gives us, by giving effect or giving support to the bill, we're actually working in that space already quite comfortably. So thank you. Thanks for that.
It also introduces descriptive Te Tiriti o Waitangi Treaty of Waitangi clause. So it has a clause in there. So it gives voice to that, which I think is good. And I think, pretty sure I put green beside that should be supported.
Okay, I'm just wondering the process too from here. So we've got a number of other people that want to speak, and then we'll just circle back on the issues that have raised and see if there's any changes to what Al has presented that we want to add or change. But keen to hear the rest of the perspectives as well. So Lydia, and then Sophie and Deborah.
Thanks. Al, you've done an amazing job of going through this with a fine-tooth comb and making it pretty clear for us what needs our attention. So thank you for a lot of hard work gone into this. On clause 37, I really think that there should be some funding. I think that this is some changes that are happening that are actually going to affect us. So I think it is definitely worth mentioning something where Central are changing legislation and it's affecting actually our ratepayers to pay that, whereas they have a bigger slice of the pie, so they should be giving some out for that. And whether that happens at a regional level might be better. And saying, Selwyn, one of the leaders in emergency management, but there are some other councils that may not be doing as well. So whether that sits at regional, I'm not sure. That might be up for discussion, but I think that there does need to be something with the changes in that. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on clauses 40 and 41 with the committee to overrule and widen the powers to declare, and what you think about that. So that was just one of my questions on there. And on clause 24, does the wording change the function? I don't think so. I think it's just is it just a change of word because you can, the time is right for them to do some amendment on group to committee. I don't know.
So the funding option, I think it's really good when we make a submission that we don't just go, we don't like this, or there needs to be some funding, but maybe we look at saying what a mechanism would be to raise funding, and whether that's, I don't think in the current climate, personal opinion, that there's an appetite for that national government, I'm going to be careful, that national government, as a central government, we'll get the wording right. That's central government to fund local. I think you would struggle with that, but I like your idea about regional funding, and there is a name for it, and it's called a uniform something charge, and that's often collected regionally, and it's already collected to some extent by ECAN, but is there an opportunity to say that of your budget, a certain percentage must be for emergency management?
Yeah, I think so.
I'll find out what the charge actually, what the name of that uniform.
You actually say that
That's it.
Yeah.
On section 40, I think the key thing is 41. So
yeah,
it talks about if at any time the emergency management committee of the relevant area district has occurred or may that an emergency has occurred or may occur, the power in section 1 has not been exercised. So
is it a pulling rank type?
It's saying that if Sam goes, oh, no, we're not going to do this, we're not going to declare, which Sam doesn't do, we have a really good working relationship in this council about when to declare, and we often declare early, which I think is a really good precautionary approach. Some councils, mayors, can be a little bit reticent about, this just makes us look bad, and that has happened in the past. And so therefore, this is trying to do the catch. If that mayor is sitting there on their hands and going, no, that's not a happening thing, they can come in over the top. So that there has to be section 2, subsection 2, has to be there before you can act. So you're not working, we're coming in over the top. And we saw that the government at times, the minister can come in over the top. I don't think they ever have, but they've threatened to. I think we're getting better as a sector of taking that precautionary approach, but I think this is just a precaution on a precaution, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you for that. Sophie, and then
Yeah. Kia ora, Al, and Jason and everybody else behind. You guys do an amazing job.
So thank you. This is really interesting. And I guess what I'm hearing is we do a pretty good job now. This might make it a bit like more that we have to do, but I'm thinking, you know, particularly the smaller TAs around us, it's massive. I mean, you have the conversations at the climate change group and you realise that, you know, you've got people who are doing this as part of 3 other jobs that they do there. And if the prioritisation requires you to be somewhere else, then there's, you know, how else do you cover this? And you kind of touched on it just there. You're almost one election away every 3 years from a council that says, no, we're going to put the money somewhere else. So I guess in that sense, having a bill or an act by then that makes you have to do more things is almost a good thing, but it doesn't come with that funding. And it's interesting. I'm kind of interested in how this brings everybody, whether this will actually bring everybody up to the same level, wherever that may be. Definitely agree with your recommendation about, you know, let's take a first principles look over it. Like, how much is this actually going to be for everybody? But I guess I can't see in there how it addresses things like, for instance, your team's done great work elsewhere in the country as well, and we want that to be able to continue. But where's the cost recovery on something like that? If that is the best way to assist everybody to rise into an optimal level, then how does that work if your district is paying for everything? It doesn't, in terms of central government funding, it's interesting because it doesn't seem to recognise things like, particularly in the recovery phase, like who's fixing the roads and has the responsibility for things like bridges. We don't have any say over how much healthcare there is in the area, let alone mental health care, but all those different things. We can't plan for that kind of recovery because it's not in our remit. So is it going to be put in those other remits for somebody else? Yeah. And I guess another part, we know from talking to ECAN for things like flooding around Hororata, which has never been, I mean, it's horrendous for the people who live there, but, you know, you imagine a Hawke's Bay level event, and that river's not had any maintenance because it's kind of not ours and they don't kind of see it as theirs. So where does it all come from? Like, how comprehensive is this going to make us be? And how, you know, especially when you've got this little word there, cost effective. Well, the cost effective there would be everybody lives all in the same place. Don't you dare leave. It's too risky. It's not going to happen. Yeah. Oh, and even to planning. So we've got Rachel here as well. You know, is there an expectation? I know you're not going to be able to answer this, but in terms of feedback, is there an expectation that this will feed into planning processes? No, you can't build there. Or we've already got things like the flooding maps, which, you know, but we know that you get pushback quite a lot. Oh, but if I do this, then I can still build here, can't I? How far ahead, how bad an event do we plan for when we don't know how bad they're going to get? I got too many questions and no answers. Sorry.
So I suppose in answer to that would be another question. Does this go far enough? Is it comprehensive enough? And is it collaborative enough? I'd have to have another look at it and look at some of the other acts, because it does talk about weaving in with the number of different acts. And it also talks about the national plan, which I showed you earlier. And the national plan is a legislative instrument. So you have to abide by the national plan. They're taking out the offence of not abiding by it, but there's an expectation that you will. And these group plans speak into, well, the national plan and the National Disaster Resilience Plan speak into the group plan.
Okay.
There is not enough, my opinion, there is not enough robustness in the assessment of emergency management and its capability at the local level and the regional level in New Zealand. There used to be, but we haven't done it since 2015. And I think they want to bring that back, and they want to bring rigor in assessment to make sure that we are not only capable, but have the capacity to do everything that is in here. That is probably a medium term to long term raising the bar nationally. But it is in there. I can't put my finger on it, but it is in there that is what the intent of this is to raise that competency level across New Zealand, because it is not there, to be fair.
So what you're saying is the last 10 years or so, we've gotten too loose and we need tightening back up again.
I don't think that a lot of councils have had the financial ability or the will to put what this council has into emergency management.
Thank you. Megan.
Does this just?
Yeah,
speak
just
now?
speak.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, kia ora koutou, and first of all, want to acknowledge this council for making those decisions to put the money into these areas that are right for this community, and congratulate you and your team for actually implementing it really well.
Thank you.
That's really pleasing to hear. Now, I want to caveat to say it wasn't until 11 a.m. that I knew that we were coming to talk about emergency management bill, and so I really can't speak to this. But given it's a workshop, I thought that I'd take the opportunity to share a little bit of my knowledge of being in the Runanga world. However, in saying that I can't speak to the bill, what I can say is that Te Runanga and Ngāi Tahu have a strategy and influence team that has formal engagement strategies that specifically write submissions on bills.
Yep.
So if you do want to know the position, particularly around how this works and fits for Māori, then I really strongly suggest that you actually do communicate with the strategy and influence team. Te Runanga and Ngāi Tahu's an interesting kind of entity. Ngāi Tahu is the tribe. Ngāi Tahu are the people. Te Runanga and Ngāi Tahu is the legal entity that has the people employed to do this stuff. And each of those, there is, I think 150 staff that currently work there outside of the commercial teams. And there's a pretty big unit that's attached to actually looking at each of the laws. So really encourage that rather than just relying on those leads, those staff that are actually engaged in emergency management. So that's all I can say to the bill. However, what I can share is, and I say this from the lens of being the general manager of Taumutu from 2018 through to 21 and then back again for the last year. So, and I can say I've engaged directly with Te Runanga and Ngāi Tahu through crisis management and COVID. And I want to say and that Te Runanga and Ngāi Tahu, please do not assume always that Te Runanga and Ngāi Tahu has relationships with Papati Purunanga or Mana Whenua. It might not be as well connected because there's 3 staff as it may be assumed. So, and also on top of that, there is Papati Purunanga that will question, is it right for Te Runanga and Ngāi Tahu staff to be sitting in these regional spaces, or should it be Papati Purunanga? So just because the iwi's assumed a role, it doesn't necessarily mean that Mana Whenua don't want to have a voice, because they're kind of different. And then the only other thing that I thought might be helpful is just to also identify that as a hapu, we haven't actually come back and talked again about whether or not our marae would be a civil defence site. We're not. And we chose that. It would have been, I think we had that discussion about 8 years ago. I think there were obstacles at the time, the level of commitment and the money and the resourcing that would be required. But it might be that we want to reconsider that, but I'd need to look at the detail of the bill and see the level of commitment that it would actually require, because quite often, like we're a community, we've got 30,000 registered members. but we only have probably about 150 active volunteers at any one time that's spread across engaging with central, regional, local government for outcomes, better outcomes for our hapu. So we're stretched. Anyway, I just thought those comments might be helpful.
Good comments, thank you, Megan. How do we support what mana whenua want at that local and regional level when we don't often understand the complexities and the history in there, and we don't want to get in the way, but we want to be supportive?
Well, first, I just want to recognise you have all of your staff, your team have that direct connect with Fiona Sloan. So big tick, you guys have got that direct at that level. If something was to happen, I know you're straight on it and she's point of contact with our communities. So we have mechanisms already in place. But actually, in fact, if we were going to rise this up above that and go, well, what input does mana whenua want into the local lens, then I think the right place for that discussion to occur would be, there's currently a mechanism whereby members of your governance meet with Te Reo Nangaranaita who govern, Taumitu governance quarterly. And so it would be saying in that forum, hey, Taumitu, is this something that you're keenly interested in? And if so, how do we engage with it? And if that were to happen and Taumitu was to say, well, actually, at this point in time, that's not our priority, but let's come, because we're doing a whole heap of other things, but let's circle it back in 1 year's time or whatever, then I think that you've done your very best to engage in the current mechanisms and structures that are in place. And if Taumitu does come back and says it's just not our priority at the moment, then you can feel assured that it doesn't mean that it's not important, but it might also send a signal back to say, actually, we think you guys are doing a pretty good job and we're comfortable with the mechanisms that are in place. But that's not for me to say. That's for Taumitu through those official routes to say.
Thank you. And I suppose that is an action point maybe that I need to throw to Sam and the governance and senior management at council to give us some feedback so that we may be able to include that we support the voice of mana whenua at a local level and a regional level, and that might be all we say, but it would be good to know that and have the endorsement of mana whenua.
Let's add one more thing. I want to make it really clear, because Taumitu has never challenged Te Reo Nangaranaita holding any of those roles whatsoever. Other papatipu have, we have not.
Thank you for that, Megan. Deborah.
Sorry for having two votes of the cherry, but coming back to page 29 on our diligent and reference to the emergency management bill, and I'm looking at the green that you've given for the offences under section 98, 99, 100, 101 and 102. They've obviously increased, right?
Minister of
the one offence involving failure to comply with a direction to evacuate premises or place.
Yeah.
Right. And I note that the fines are increasing to 50,000 in the individual case and 150,000 in the case of a body corporate. I think you can see where I'm going, because in the past we've had a particular community that is in a high risk area that we actually maintain the licenses for. And I'd just like some clarification. And we know that some of these people refuse to vacate, or if they do vacate, they sneak back in, right? I just like to understand, given that we are the leaseholder of the land and we have the responsibility of the licenses, whose responsibility under a body corporate is that for the fine? Is it us as council, or how do we deal with that particular scenario? Because that's quite a complex one. or is each person that goes back or refuses to leave can be held responsible for $50,000 worth of costs?
So
I just want to know how it's going to work for a community that we have a responsibility for through leases.
It
Is
may
it
be
what-
something that's specific to this act, which I'll get Elle to speak to, but I think this is an issue for us to think about what we wrap up in the license, and so that we then think about the specific responsibility to each license holder to abide by all the laws and any direction that council staff might give from time to time, including the emergency management staff around emergency declarations. And you know, there's a range of other things that sit in that license conversation beyond just emergency management, but I think that's the place to have what we expect for particular communities where we know the risk is high, and we already have an agreement with them to be on that land under certain conditions.
My question is in regards to the bill though, is it captured by the body corporate, and whose responsibility is it for the body corporate? Is it us as council?
So the Interpretation Act, I think it's section 5, talks about you take the plain ordinary meaning of the act. And I would have thought the plain ordinary meaning is a body corporate. So you would have to be specifically a body corporate to be charged. And it would be if in a building, it's a body corporate and they did not enable that to be evacuated. We take a very the precautionary approach when we declare, and we use the powers, or the police use the delegated powers under the Act to evacuate people. We would normally give them fair warning, because the last thing you want to do is in 5 minutes notice just evacuate people. As we did a month and a half ago, voluntary evacuations. We tend to do that. But this gives some power to the police to go, you're out. Normally they would arrest, take them into custody, hold them, let them go. I'm not aware of anybody charged here and then placed before a court or given an infringement notice. A lot of these will be infringement notices. I'm not aware that anybody has been charged and fined. They are normally arrested, which is a real pain trying to get people out. It takes 4 people normally to get 1 person out. That's why we try and do it by consultation. And normally they're just held in custody and then released, not charged.
Thanks, Al. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions into this conversation. There's a couple of other things that I just want to make sure that we are strong in our submission on. And it's sort of been raised here, but it's the clarity around resilience and capital work to be prepared pre-event and the interface with the RMA. And so this legislation has the ability, well, there's the ability to have the conversation around the new Natural and Built Environment Act and Spatial Planning Act around where does, what overrides what and what's the hierarchy in the legislation, because there's a whole lot of work that we know could be done in our district, but isn't because of current conditions around the RMA. And so is that at the right level, and who's challenging whether that sits at the right level and where this comes in and where it doesn't come in? So some clarity around that would be helpful. And I guess what we're asking for is that clarity, because I don't know, in the end, it needs to be case by case to understand exactly what the outcome of a particular capital work is going to be, particularly for us, it's flooding, so it's around rivers. And there's the biodiversity and sensitivity around the natural environment that needs to be considered alongside flood protection. And the second piece for me is around, I totally support the declaration being wider than the current structure. And I think there's a hierarchy at the moment that kind of says the mayor or the deputy mayor or anyone else that might be an elected member or anyone else that you can find if you can't get any of those people. So, you know, like that kind of sits there and means you can in the end get to someone, but it kind of does point everyone to try and get the mayor to do that. And I think that there are other capable, trained and professional people that could be in that space to be able to do that. And so, I mean, yes, the mayor's, that's fine, but I think looking broader than that is helpful. We need to have country standards around capability so that whenever anyone comes to Selwyn from somewhere else, our systems are known, the standards are known, and the same when we send anyone somewhere else, we're not spending the first 3 or 4 days just trying to learn the system, because we've actually trained and understand and know the system that's there. That's good for Aotearoa and that should be, I mean, that just should be there, and it's crazy that it's not now. And it's also around like IT consistency, training consistency, and I think in here whether there's the ability to talk about our experience with Gets Ready, because that will look different community to community, but actually having a standard system around how we connect with communities would be helpful too. So when we end up in a space, we understand the infrastructure behind how those connections work. And I'd also add in here, I didn't see it, but it might be there. I don't think that the current group committee are the right people to be there. I think having the mayors is a good start, and having mana whenua there is necessary. But in the same way that we appoint experts to our audit and risk committee, or that we sit here and we're asking Megan to come in and bring some expertise, because elected members don't always bring the right level of knowledge, background and training in a specific area, and civil defence is narrow enough that I think elected members are important, but actually there could be 3 or 4 other seats at the group level that bring in the required governance expertise, who understand civil defence, that would enable better decisions at the group level than what the current system allows. Rather than just for information, they would actually be informative with voices around the table.
So if I just want to get that last bit right, well, it's clear in mind, the ability to delegate the role at a governance level.
I think the group committees, the joint committees, should have appointees, broader than just the elected member from each TA and mana whenua. There should actually be 3 or 4 seats available for subject experts around civil defence to hold that governance role as an equal with the rest of the committee.
As an option, or they should have it?
It's an option. Option's fine. Al, where to from here on this? What does...
I just wanted to ask you a question on, as in everybody, I put in here, duties of emergency services, it's clause 59. And it says basically they just have to try and do BAU as well as they possibly can. I've wondered whether that should be wider. We have a really good working relationship with police and fence here in St John's, but particularly police. We have all their staff, sectional staff and NCOs come here and we do a briefing with them about this is what emergency management is and this is how we can work together. These are your powers. This is our expectations. What are yours? Doesn't happen elsewhere in New Zealand. But I think it's particularly at a regional level that Fens and police and St John's see themselves primarily as a response agency, which they are, but they have a particular expertise and I think a responsibility to be involved in planning and readiness and lifting resilience. And I wonder whether this bill goes far enough in actually placing a responsibility on them to be involved in that. Likewise with the critical infrastructure entities. Should they be in that same sort of place that there's an onus put on them, a legislative onus that they must do this stuff? I throw that out to you. Is that something you think is worthwhile to make them come to the table?
I think yes. And you could also include the military in that. And I guess they're involved here because they're local to us. But actually, if it's only when the minister wants to bring in the military that it occurs, that's after the effect. Whereas if they're involved in the planning before that, I think that would be helpful too. Nicole?
I agree with Sam, but I question though whether their own pieces of legislation would already have things like that in them for them. I don't know. It's just a question I'm asking.
Phil might know more about that than I do. Yeah. He was much higher up in the organisation than this.
Well, I was just saying, I mean, from a pragmatic point of view, when you looked at the response that the police have had, it's always been in that planning space anyway. But that's, again, it's unique for Canterbury, Auckland and Wellington. answer, because I think you're absolutely on the money. I think compelling them to behave more like Canterbury does, if we can do it. It's just a submission. Why not? Why wouldn't we?
Yeah, thank you.
Sharon?
Thank you. I'd actually extend that to health as well. So I can speak from experience both in health and local government of events. I don't think it does compel emergency services in their current legislation to be responsive. We've also seen the post-recovery phase challenges as well by those entities not being compelled to be round the table. So I would extend it to Whatu Ora as well.
Thank you. Just to answer your question about the process here. So there was the giving of the documents so that you had everything available for you so that you could make an informed decision on what we were doing here. The collection of feedback in this workshop, and hopefully that has been worthwhile from your point of view. It's been worthwhile from our point of view. Collating that feedback, working with Ryan from the policy team, who eats submissions for breakfast, and he will draft something for us, and then seeking endorsement of that and your feedback on that, and then submitting before, I think it is the 3rd of November, it has to be submitted. That's my thoughts. As Sharon, you might have another view.
No, I agree with that. And I was actually also going to put in that I think Selwyn is an exemplar and should speak to the submission, because I think it's really worthwhile. You've got a lot of experience, as has Mayor Sam, to actually bring that to speak to the submission at a national level.
I think that's a good idea.
Cool. And if we can get it back into a council meeting before it's submitted, great. And if not, we've had some good discussion here, circulated by email, and there'll be a retrospective endorsement of the submission if it doesn't line up with the council timetable.
And there will be a Canterbury group submission, from what I understand, and we are able to put into that. But I think it's important because of the way that Selwyn responds before, during, and after an emergency, that our voice is heard by Sam at Select Committee. Well worthwhile doing.
Thank you, Al. Thanks for the opportunity this morning, and for the team, for what you do for us. We're going to break for lunch now. We have 1 o'clock meeting this afternoon, and following the meeting, Sharon wants to have some time with councillors, so that might take 45 minutes, an hour at the end of the council meeting. So the council won't necessarily finish. It won't be a long meeting. There's not a whole lot of, it might be a long meeting. There's not a lot on the agenda necessarily. But after that, if we could please, councillors, just stay behind. Yeah.